agreed to inspect the rooms at 221B Baker Street that had been mentioned during our encounter. They consisted of two comfortable bedrooms and a single cheerful and airy sitting room with two large windows through which light streamed in. The apartment seemed so convenient in every respect, and its price, once divided between the two of us, so reasonable that the deal was closed immediately, and without further delay we took possession of the dwelling. That very afternoon I proceeded to move my belongings from the hotel to the house, and the next morning Sherlock Holmes did the same with his, arriving with luggage consisting of suitcases and numerous boxes. For a day or two we busied ourselves unpacking our things and arranging them as best we could. Once that task was completed, it was simply a matter of getting accustomed to our new surroundings and putting down fresh roots. Holmes was certainly not a difficult man to live with. His manners were gentle and his habits regular. Rarely was he found out of bed after 10 at night, and invariably when I got up in the morning he had already had breakfast and gone out. Some of his days were spent entirely in the chemistry laboratory or the dissecting room, while others were occasionally devoted to long walks that seemed to take him to the lower quarters of the city. When seized by a burst of work, he could display unparalleled energy, but at intervals, with fatal regularity, he would fall into a strange state of apathy, and then for days he would lie, stretched out on the sitting room sofa, hardly moving a muscle or uttering a word from morning until night. On such occasions I couldn't help but notice a certain lost, absent expression in his eyes, which, if not for the temperance and cleanliness of his entire lifestyle, I might have attributed to the effects of some narcotic. As the weeks went by, my interest in him and the curiosity his way of life aroused in me grew increasingly evident and profound. His very appearance and outward aspect were enough to catch the attention of even the most casual observer. He stood more above than below 6 feet tall, although his extreme thinness exaggerated his height considerably. His eyes were sharp and penetrating, except during the lethargic periods I've mentioned, and his thin hawk-like nose gave him an air of liveliness and determination. His chin, too, prominent and solid, revealed a man of firm resolutions. His hands were always stained with ink and various chemicals, yet they were of exquisite delicacy, as I observed countless times in the way Holmes handled his fragile scientific instruments. Perhaps the reader is already labeling me as an incorrigible busybody, given how much this man aroused my curiosity and the impertinent eagerness with which I tried to overcome the reserve that surrounded everything concerning him. However, it would not be fair, before passing judgment, to forget how aimless my life was at that time and how few things could enliven it. Given the state of my health, I was only allowed to venture outdoors on exceptionally fine days, and on the others I lacked friends to sweeten the monotony of my daily routine. In such circumstances, I welcomed almost enthusiastically the small mystery surrounding my companion, as well as the opportunity to pass the time trying to unravel it. He was not pursuing a medical career. He himself, in response to a certain question, had confirmed Stamford's opinion on that matter. Nor did he seem engaged in any kind of study that might lead him to an academic degree or open any of the recognized doors into the scholarly world. Nevertheless, the zeal he displayed in certain tasks was remarkable, and his knowledge, eccentrically limited to specific fields, was so vast and meticulous that it gave rise to simply astonishing observations. It was impossible that such dedicated work and such precise information did not serve a specific purpose. A haphazard reader is not known for the accuracy of the data accumulated during their readings. No one saturates their mind with trivial matters unless they have a compelling reason to do so. If he knew an extraordinary number of things, he was equally ignorant of many others that were common knowledge. Of contemporary literature, philosophy, and politics, he was almost completely uninformed. Once, when I mentioned the name of Thomas Carlyle, he asked me with the utmost innocence who he was and what he had done. However, my astonishment reached its peak when I accidentally discovered that he was unaware of the Copernican theory and the structure of the solar system. That a civilized man in our 19th century did not know that the Earth revolves around the sun seemed to me such an extraordinary fact that I could scarcely believe it. "You seem surprised," he said, smiling at my expression of astonishment. Now that you've informed me, I shall do my best to forget it. Forget it? Understand me, he explained. I consider that a person's brain is like a small empty attic which you furnish with items of your own choosing. A fool takes in all sorts of rubbish he comes across so that the useful knowledge he might have is buried or, at best, so jumbled with other things that it's hard to find. A skilled worker selects carefully what he places in his brain's attic. His arsenal will consist only of useful tools, but these will be abundant and in perfect condition. It is a grave mistake to assume that the walls of that small attic are elastic or capable of indefinite expansion. Beyond a certain point, every new piece of information added necessarily displaces another that we already possessed. It is therefore of inestimable importance to ensure that useless facts do not crowd out useful ones. Yes, but the solar system, I protested. And what do I care about the solar system? He interrupted, already impatient. You say we revolve around the sun. If we revolved around the moon, it would not make the slightest difference to who I am or what I do. I was on the verge of asking him about exactly what it was that he did, but something in his demeanor made me understand that such a question would not be well received. Nevertheless, I could not stop reflecting on our conversation and the clues it suggested. He had mentioned his intention not to meddle in any knowledge unrelated to his work. Therefore, all the facts he had gathered must by necessity serve him in some practical way. I mentally listed the various subjects in which he had shown exceptional knowledge. I even took a pencil and began writing them down. I couldn't suppress a smile when I saw the document in its entirety. It read as follows: Sherlock Holmes, his limits. Knowledge of literature, none. Knowledge of philosophy, none. Knowledge of astronomy, none. Knowledge of politics, scant. Knowledge of botany, varied. Up to date on matters related to belladonna, opium, and poisons in general. Nil regarding gardening. Knowledge of geology, practical but limited. Can distinguish different types of soil at a glance. After a walk, he has shown me the mud stains on his trousers and identified, by the consistency and color of the earth, which part of London each came from. Knowledge of chemistry, profound. Knowledge of anatomy, accurate but unsystematic. Knowledge of sensational literature, immense. Seems to know every detail of every macabre event of our century. Plays the violin well. Expert boxer and skilled with the single stick and sword. Familiar with the practical aspects of English law. At this point, desperate, I threw the list into the fire. If, to guess what this man is up to, I told myself, I must determine which profession aligns with the common denominator of his talents, I might as well give up now. I realize I mentioned earlier his aptitude for the violin. It was remarkable, though no less peculiar than the rest of his skills. That he could perform musical pieces, even difficult ones, I knew well, as he had played for me some Lieder by Mendelssohn and other compositions of my choosing upon request. However, when left to his own tastes, he rarely produced recognizable tunes or melodies from his instrument. Reclining in his armchair for an entire afternoon, he would close his eyes and absent-mindedly pluck the violin strings, resting it sideways across one knee. Sometimes the notes were vibrant and melancholic. Other times they had a whimsical, cheerful air. No doubt these sounds outwardly reflected the musician's hidden thoughts, either giving them definitive form or merely accompanying them as a capricious melody of the spirit. God knows I wouldn't have passively endured those exasperating solos if Holmes didn't have the habit of concluding them with a swift succession of my favorite pieces, played as compensation for what I had to endure before. We had been living together for about a week without anyone visiting our quarters when I began to suspect that my companion suffered from the same lack of friendships as I did. However, as I soon discovered, this was far from the truth. Not only did Holmes have acquaintances, but they also spanned the most diverse layers of society. For instance, there was a small mouse-like man, pale and dark-eyed, introduced to me as Mr. Lestrade, who visited our home no fewer than 3 or 4 times in a single week. One morning, an elegantly dressed young woman was our guest for over half an hour. That evening, she was followed by a shabby gray-haired man, the very image of an old Jewish peddler who seemed to be on edge, only to be succeeded by a worn, elderly lady. One day my companion conversed with an elderly gentleman with snow-white hair. Another, he received a porter dressed in his corduroy uniform. Whenever a member of this motley assortment appeared, Holmes would usually request the use of the sitting room, and I would retire to my bedroom. He never failed to apologize for the inconvenience such visits might cause me. "I have to use this room as an office," he would say, "and the people who come in are my clients." What better moment to question him directly? Yet I was always restrained by a sense of propriety, unwilling to force a confidence. I imagine there was something preventing him from revealing that aspect of his life, a notion he soon dispelled by addressing the matter directly without any prompting on my part. I clearly recall it was March 4th when, having risen earlier than usual, I found Holmes in the midst of his still unfinished breakfast. The landlady was so accustomed to my late mornings that there was neither a plate set nor coffee prepared for me. With the characteristic and unreasonable petulance common to most people, I rang the bell and curtly announced that I expected my meal. Then, picking up a newspaper from the table, I tried to distract myself while my companion silently finished his toast. The headline of one article was underlined in red, and naturally it drew my attention first. Beneath the red line appeared these grandiose words, "The Book of Life," followed by an exposition on the countless things one could deduce simply by applying precise and systematic observation to the events chance might place before them. The article struck me as a strange mixture of brilliance and nonsense. Solid, well-reasoned arguments were followed by inferences that seemed overly bold or exaggerated. The author claimed he could delve into another man's most hidden thoughts, guided by subtle signs such as a gesture, the twitch of a muscle, or the glance of an eye. According to him, deception and disguise were impossible before someone trained in analysis and observation. What such an individual deduced would be as certain as Euclid's propositions. The results would be so astonishing that anyone unfamiliar with the methods leading from principles to conclusions would inevitably believe they were in the presence of a true sorcerer. From a single drop of water, the author claimed, one could logically infer the possible existence of an Atlantic Ocean or the Niagara Falls, even if one had never heard the slightest thing about either. All of life is a vast chain, the nature of which can be revealed by observing just a single isolated link. Like any other craft, the science of deduction and analysis requires prolonged and patient study from its practitioner, and no human life is long enough to allow anyone to achieve the highest perfection to which the deductive art is capable. Before delving into the larger moral and psychological aspects that this subject raises, I will address some elementary problems. For instance, how, upon barely glimpsing a person, it is possible to infer their entire history, as well as their occupation or profession. It may seem a trivial exercise, yet it sharpens observational skills, revealing the most significant details and how to interpret them. A person's fingernails, the sleeves of their coat, their boots, the knees of their trousers, the calluses on their thumbs and forefingers, their facial expression, the cuffs of their shirt. All these personal details clearly reveal the profession of the individual being observed. That such elements, when combined, would fail to illuminate even the most difficult case for a competent inquirer is, quite simply, inconceivable. "What an absolute load of nonsense!" I exclaimed, slamming the newspaper down on the table with a sharp thud. "I've never read such rubbish in my life." "What is it?" asked Sherlock Holmes. "That article," I replied, pointing at it with my spoon as I sat down to my breakfast. "I see you've read it since it's underlined. I won't deny the writer's skill, but his claims infuriate me. It's obviously the work of one of those armchair theorists who delight in concocting clever paradoxes in the solitude of their studies. Pure theory. I'd like to see him crammed into the underground in a third-class carriage, face to face with the passengers, and tasked with guessing each of their professions. I'd bet 1,000 to 1 against him.